Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hi everyone, today we are going to get started on the sculpting tools, which is very exciting. We're going to go over the grab brush for today and some of the basics of the sculpting UI so that you can find it. So let's go ahead and get started. Today I am using my Cintiq and I have my Wacom pen ready to go. If you don't have one, that's okay. You can also use a mouse for this. If you get really into sculpting though, I do suggest getting a tablet eventually because it just feels much more natural to sculpt with a Cintiq. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D. So here we are. You can find your sculpting tools within the mesh menu under Sculpt. We have sculpt tools here. We're going to talk about all of these. We have brushes here. We're going to talk about all of these as well throughout this podcast. If you've been with me before, you know that we cover another 3D modeling tool each week, and I'm very excited that we've covered so many that now we're into the new chapter of sculpting at this point. But here you can see that these are all grayed out, and that's because we don't have a mesh ready to work on. So we'll do that in a moment. Quickly, I'd also like to show you that you can go into the sculpting UI up here. You'll see up here in the upper right is sculpting mode. If we click on this, our layout will change. You'll see we have our sculpting brushes here on the left. We have something called sculpting layers. We're going to talk about this in the future. We aren't talking about them today. The object manager is the tab left of the sculpting layer. So if you're wondering, where are my objects? Where did they go? And this interface feels too new. Hopefully this helps ground you a little bit in here. So I'll click on our objects because we actually need some meshes to work on. So let's go ahead and start off with dropping in a sphere into our scene. So we'll grab a sphere primitive by holding a click on this cube. We'll drop in the sphere here. We'll change this from standard to hexahedron because it has more quads and it's a more even mesh. It's better for sculpting. And I'll increase the segments quite high because that'll increase our resolution while sculpting. And when we go into subdivisions, you'll have an idea of how to keep your mesh a little bit lower poly while sculpting, but that's going to be a topic for another day. This is good enough for now. Similar to the mesh tools, you won't be able to sculpt on this sphere until you make it editable by either hitting the C hotkey or by hitting this icon right here. They both do the same thing. The C hotkey is just the shortcut for it. So I'll go ahead and click that. I also want to drop in a plane, so I'm holding a click on our primitives and I am dropping a plane into our scene. I'll increase the width segments, I'll increase the height segments all the way so that you really get an idea of the amount of detail you can put into these meshes. The higher the resolution, the more detailed the textures will be when you're sculpting. So I'll go ahead and put this over here. And once again, we'll hit the C hotkey to make this editable. And now we have two meshes ready to go to sculpt. We only have one problem. We cannot see their edges, so I'll change our display to constant shading lines. Or maybe garage shading lines. I'll go with garage shading lines for right now. And there we go. We're off to a good start. Now that we have two meshes that are editable, you'll see that our sculpting tools are now available to us off to the side. And if you hover over them, you can see what they're called: draw, wax, knife, inflatable, or inflate rather, amplify, repeat, grab, smooth, pinch, flatten, fill, and scrape. If you've ever worked in ZBrush, many of these brushes will seem very intuitive and very familiar. I learned ZBrush before I ever got into Cinema 4D, so when I found out that there were sculpting tools in here as well, there's something a little bit comforting about the familiarity of that jumping into here. So if you are from a ZBrush background, it's good to know. These tools are helpful inside of Cinema 4D. Let's go ahead and get started. So I've selected my grab brush. This is what we are going over for today. And quickly, I'd like to go over our basic tab settings here. We have link size, and link size will link the size when you switch from your brushes, the size of your brush. So your brush has a size, and there's a few ways you can adjust this. If you are using a mouse, you can click the middle mouse button and drag it, and it will expand or become smaller, and you can see your size is listed there. So that's one way you can change your brush size. And when I'm working with a pen like I am today, I actually prefer to use the bracket keys to adjust the size of my brushes. So you can use the right bracket and you can use the left bracket to adjust your size. Now, of course, you can also go into your settings and you can adjust your size here manually with a slider. So right of the basic tab are your settings here, and you can see that we can make this smaller, we can make this bigger, you can choose any size you want, and that will adjust the amount of area that's being affected by the brush on your mesh, which is good to know. You'll notice that my brush size can change in between the different brushes. If I make this one larger, like this, and I switch back to the grab brush and make this one smaller, when I switch between these, you'll see that size change happening. Now, if I were to click link size, as I switch brushes, they are remaining the same size as I'm working. So that is an option here. And you can find this link size in a few places. Up here, if you hover over these, you'll see link size is also here. And you can enable it up here as well as in the basic tab. And this is available for most of the brushes in the basic tab. So if you learn one, you learn them all. And for the most part, there's a few variances between them. The next option is link strength. So a lot of these brushes also have a strength. In the instance for the grab brush, there really isn't a strength slider, although it's appearing in the basic tab, so it's not really a thing that relates as much to the grab tool, but I will go over what link strength is for other brushes in the future. Although it's listed here, it's not as relevant to this tool in my opinion. There's also this option here, keep visual size. And keep visual size is the idea of your brush will be visually the same size, whether if you zoom in or out. If you turn this on, for me personally, it hasn't worked. That might be a bug inside of Cinema 4D, but it's supposed to stay the same size whether or not if you zoom in or out. For me personally, I don't really feel like that's necessary. That would throw me off a little bit if it stayed the same size zooming in and out, and maybe that's why that's removed here. So I would just keep that checked off and not really worry about it ever. Back face, so as we all know, there's a front side of a mesh and there's a back side of a mesh, and that is used for calculations. We went over this when we covered normals in 3D printing because you need your normals to go the right way if you 3D print, so that the 3D printer knows what's the inside and the outside of the mesh. It's also great for calculations while rendering, so that you don't have to calculate both the back side and the front side if it's not necessary, and it speeds up your computer. Now for this instance, when we're talking about the back side of the mesh, we're talking about sculpting. We're not really talking about too much else, but this is being calculated with normals. So when you check on back face, if I were to go inside of the sphere, we're looking at the back side of the sphere. These are the back side of our normals. And if I were to try to use the brush on here, I can, because I have back face turned on. If I turn it off, I can no longer use the brush tool, and it only works on the front face. So you have control over where you use this brush and what it's doing and how it's affecting the mesh. It works on the front face, but not on the back face now. If your normals are messed up, this tool's not going to work properly. So I'll also leave a link to the normals episode so that you know how to troubleshoot that if that is an error you're running into while sculpting. So that's the first part of the basic tab we're going through. We also need to cover preview modes. So on surface, you can see as I'm moving my brush around the surface, it is changing direction like it's actually on the surface, thus the name on surface for the preview mode. You can also have screen. Now this way, it's always facing towards the screen or our camera. As I move my brush back and forth, it's facing towards us. Or if we don't want to see your brush at all, you can just turn this off. And this is really confusing to me, so I never do that, because I like to see the size of my brush. But if your brush is ever missing and you can't see that circle and you're wondering why you can't see your brush size, you probably turned this off. So it's good to be aware of, just so that you know how to turn it back on again. On surface is my favorite, so I like to keep it on here, and that works for me. I'm going to turn off this link size because it's not really important to me whether if these are linked. And let's go into our next tab. We're starting to get somewhere. We have our size settings. We went over that. We also have fall off settings in here. And all of these should be looking a little bit familiar to you if you've been following along on this podcast, because there's another brush tool we covered under the mesh modeling menu with very similar settings. Let me see if I can find it in here listed. Yes, so there's the other brush tool. This came before all of these new brush tools, which are a little bit more detailed. And there's also the magnet tool. Now, both of these are a nice introduction to brushes because many of the settings are the same and they work very, very similar. So I'll leave links to those in the description in case if you're interested in those tools. But they definitely relate to the grab brush. So the grab brush does a lot like what it sounds like it does. It grabs your mesh and it's helpful for shaping a character. If you need to make the character's arms longer and they aren't the right proportion, the grab brush is actually pretty good with that. Or just making subtle shape changes to a mesh. So it can be helpful, and you can adjust the size in here. It's controlled mostly by how far you pull out your mesh rather than the strength. Some tools are more controlled by the strength. You can adjust your fall off in here, very similar to the magnet and the brush tools. So right now we have this nice gradient with our fall off. What if we make a new shape here? I'm going to lower this down. I'm going to hit Control to create another point here. I'm going to raise it up. And I'll also just make our brush a little bit smaller because this is giant. And I'll pull out the surface, and you can see it's a different shape here. If I hold Control, it will pull out the surface in the normal direction. Once again, very similar to the magnet tool. And that kind of looks like a volcano. Like we just added a volcano on here with the brush. And maybe this is a planet or something like that. Okay, so that's how that works. If you ever mess around with the fall off and you just want it to go back to default, you can hit this little button right here and it'll go back to the original, and you can go back to working how you were before. The next option here is you can load a preset. If I click on this, you'll see there's all of these different options here for fall off. You can click on one you like. Let's do this triangle option here. I need to double click on that actually. There we go. And you can actually see that fall off shown on our cursor here, which is nice. If I pull this, you can see that it is affecting our mesh that way. I might try a different one. Ease in. So that's another one, and you can see that is previewed on our cursor itself, which is nice. So it's a nice way to visualize what is happening with your brush, both the size and the fall off. You can see visually on your screen without going through the settings. As save preset, you can save this preset for the future if you like it. You can choose a name and a location for it and hit OK, and it'll happen. I don't want to save this preset, so I'm going to hit cancel. It's a lot like saving brushes in Photoshop. You can do it in 3D as well. And let's go down here, direction. So you can control your direction with your mouse and where you pull your mouse. And that is what this option is here. You can also control your direction with the normal direction. So we were talking about this a little bit. And what's normals? It's the direction that is tangent to a polygon, and Cinema 4D again uses that to calculate the inside and the outside of a mesh. However, it also just means that when you use this tool and you have that checked on, it's going to be pulling the mesh out in tangent to the surface rather than wherever my mouse is on the screen. So it keeps that angle consistent. You can also choose to move your mesh in the X direction. If you hit X, the Y direction, if you hit Y. This should be updating. Hopefully this time it did Y direction. So now this is going in the Y direction regardless of where I click. So that's that option. You can also do the Z direction here. And then surface distance. So when you check this on, this option is usually used to control what part of the surface you're affecting. So the brush tool in here, including the grab brush, is often actually used for rigging characters. You can shape their face and save that using something like the pose morph. And when you do that, it's easier to shape the face actually using the grab brush or one of the brush tools. But a lot of times artists will run into this problem where they want to move the jaw of a character. Maybe to make the character talk or look surprised or smile really big. So you need to move the character from a more stoic position to those other positions to record them so they can rig this character and animate it and have those saved facial expressions and such. Now, the problem that you may run into is you are trying to move maybe the character's chin, but you don't want to accidentally also grab their nose and their eyes along with the chin when you're trying to open the mouth of the character. So where this tool comes in handy, actually, maybe I can kind of make a fake mouth here on the sphere with the brush tool. I'm going to have this go back to the original. I'm just going to grab here. I need to change our direction to our mouse direction, so I'm just going to now kind of close the mouth. So we have a little bit of a hole for the mouth. And you'll see already I'm running into the problem where I'm kind of starting to move the top part of the mouth as I'm trying to close this. I also have the other problem where this is not symmetrical. So I'm going to enable symmetry here. And we're going to try to close the mouth once again. And we're going to use surface distance so that it's easier for me to close the mouth without affecting the top portion. And if you ever end up with weirdness happening like this, you can smooth things out holding the shift key. That's another thing that I want you to know. And that works with all brushes. So now this guy has a mouth. I want to bring out his chin a little bit because he looks a little bit grumpy with his chin that shape, I feel like, and I don't want him to look too grumpy. It's not a bad day, it's a good day today. Okay, so he has a mouth, and you can see how much easier it is for me to move the mouth and shape the mouth with this. He's a talking sphere, and he has a lot of opinions, so he needs a mouth to say them. I have a little bit more control, and I can actually make some facial expressions. I can make him smile. Now he's happy. His opinion is that he's happy and life is good, and he'd like to eat some ice cream. I'm just making up stuff, but you have the idea. That's what that tool is for. We have more options here, but we've gone through 2 tabs, so we are halfway there. We have stamps, and stamps are fun. Stamps are very, very fun. I feel like this face needs eyes, though. This is driving me a little bit crazy that this guy does not have eyes. He's having a happy day. Okay, so let's talk about the stamp options. The stamp options here, in order to use them, you need to first check this box on that says stamp. You can load a stamp preset, you can save a stamp preset, and you can clear an existing preset that you've started creating in here if it's no longer working for you. So that's what those buttons are here. You can use an image for the stamp, you can use a material for a stamp. Now I warn you that the Redshift materials do not work well with the stamps. But the classic no-node materials actually work pretty decent. So if you add in one of the old standard legacy materials, you could use this as a stamp. It will use the grayscale values. Think of how bump maps, when you're texturing, use grayscale values, black and white, to tell you whether if the surface is raised or if it's lowered. So you could add in a texture in here. For example, We could add in a noise. I'll just choose a noise texture for right now. We can choose a different type of noise. I don't think that you really need to use the material mode most of the time, unless if you want something like noise in here, and there's a lot of different options. I'm trying to pick one that I like, that I think will look nice. Let's try this one. So you could use this, and we'll use it on the plane here. We'll go back into our brush here, our grab brush, and we'll drag and we'll drop this under material. I should probably name this something like noise. And I'll turn off symmetry. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And we can see that the noise is now controlling our brush, which is pretty interesting. And you can actually see what this looks like a little bit better. I'm going to hide this other sphere over here so we could focus on the plane. You can control or see what this looks like and preview it a little bit more. If you scroll down, you can see a preview in this circle here, and that'll show you what this looks like. You can see the fall off is also being used on this. If you check off the fall off and watch this circle here, you'll see that it doesn't have that dark shading around it anymore. That was from our fall off, and now it just evenly affects that whole circled area without the fall off taking effect. So what this setting here does is it will overlay, almost put the fall off on top on multiply. If you're familiar with Photoshop, it'll just put that shading on top of it. I'll go up here again. So that's how you can add it as a noise. If you want to add a texture, we can find some textures in the asset browser here. Let's go ahead and see what we can find in here. I may undo what I've done to the surface so that we can show some other effects. Let's use this brick texture here. So this is actually a bump map, and that works pretty well for this. So I dropped that image in there, and you could see that we have the fall off on. So this is it with the fall off on. I'll hold Control. You can see we're getting a little bit of a brick texture there. If we turn off the fall off again, what it'll look like is you'll see more of that circular shape. It won't have that fall off also affecting it. You can adjust the rotation of this while you texture it down here. So I can increase the rotation, and you can see that is at a different angle than the first one. You can choose to use one of these. You can flip the symmetry. You can adjust the gray value. I'll go ahead and undo those with Control Z for PC or Command Z for Mac. And in here, we can adjust the gray value. So if I take this down to 0, I hit Control and I pull up my mouse, it'll look like that. If I take this to 1 and I click here, pull up my mouse, it'll look like that. So what this is doing is it is affecting how much of this texture is raised or how much of this texture is lowered when we use the grab brush. And if you want to preview this a little bit better in this little circle down here, you can turn on show depth, and it actually uses colors in order to help you visualize what's going down and what's going up. So you can see red is going down, green is going up. When I change this back to 0, it's going up, so it's green. But if you put it somewhere in the middle, you'll see a mixture of both, and that means the surface is both being raised up and lowered. Black is neutral. So if you see the texture showing up as black, that's neutral. Red and green are whether if it's being raised and lowered. So that should help you visualize your textures and how they're working. You can, of course, scale your textures and such too. And you can see that the textures are only as detailed as the number of polygons you have and your resolution. If you select and close, it'll become more of a square-shaped texture rather than circular. So when you turn off and close, it takes up the whole circle here. When you turn on and close, it's a square. So in some cases, you might just want a square texture, and you're okay with that. And in some cases, you might want it to not be as obvious. So you might want to have the violet or the enclosed off, and you might even want to use the fall off as well with your stamp. Because if you're doing something like you are adding scales to a dragon with this, it's a little bit easier to blend them if you use the fall off and you have enclosed turned off. But if you're adding buttons to a mesh, that's a character, adding buttons to maybe their clothing, then in that case, it makes more sense to maybe leave enclose on and to turn off the fall off. So that's why there's all these buttons here that give you that kind of control. Let's go over our modifiers. So some of the brushes come with something called modifiers, and it's like adding an additional effect on top of the existing brush. So we know the grab brush grabs the surface and shapes it and forms it and such and all. Now, what if you want to also smooth it? So if we have our stamp on and we are creating bricks without this modifier on, you can see what they look like. I'll actually, just to make this easier to see, I'll turn off the fall off here in our stamp. You can see what these bricks look like. Now, what if I want to enable modifiers, and the modifier we want to enable is smooth? So this will smooth out our brush, and you can adjust the strength here. And just for the sake of making this easy to see, I'm going to make the strength 100%. I'll hold Control, click and drag my mouse, and you can see that these bricks are quite a bit more smoothed out than these bricks. These bricks have harder edges. These bricks are smooth. So that is the difference from the smooth. And the higher you increase the strength, the more smoothed out this will be. If it's at 0, it'll look more like this without the smooth modifier turned on. So those are basically all the grab settings. I feel like personally I could go back in here and continue adjusting this sphere here and really work on this character. So I'll try to not go down that rabbit hole too much with you, since your time is valuable. It was a lot of fun to 3D model with all of you, and you can create a lot of cool things with this. And this is just an introduction to what you can do with some of the brush tools and sculpting, and we're going to go through all of it, and it's really powerful. And if you learn this inside of Cinema 4D, it's really easy to also pick up sculpting in other software like ZBrush and vice versa. I learned ZBrush first, and when I saw the sculpting tools in here, I was really excited, as I mentioned. So I think this will help you, regardless of what software you're working in the future, with the brush tools. And I hope to see you next week. We'll go over another tool. So I'll see you here hopefully on Ambient 3D Animations.